How does a city of criminals and exiles become one of the most powerful empires in history? And what really caused its downfall? This isn't the clean textbook version. This is the real story, full of betrayal, madness, war, and ambition so ruthless it changed the world forever. Let's start where myth meets murder. According to legend, Rome began with two brothers, Romulus and Remus, born of a war god, Mars, and a priestess who had taken a vow of chastity. That scandal alone was enough to get them sentenced to death as newborns. Their jealous great-uncle wanted them gone, but fate, or propaganda, had other plans. The twins were cast into the river, only to be rescued by a wild she-wolf who nursed them back to life. Or so the story goes. More likely, they were saved by shepherds. But in Rome, myth always walked hand in hand with politics. As young men, they disagreed over where to build their new city. Romulus didn't just win the argument, he killed his own brother. With Remus gone, Romulus named the city after himself and threw open the gates to anyone, fugitives, criminals, runaway slaves. Rome became a haven for the desperate. But there was a problem. No women. So they invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival, then abducted their daughters. The so-called rape of the Sabine women wasn't just barbaric, it was strategic. And somehow, against all odds, it led to an alliance. Romulus and the Sabine king co-ruled. For a while. Romulus would eventually vanish during a sudden storm. Some claimed he was taken by the gods and became divine himself. Others whispered he'd been torn apart by jealous senators. Either way, the throne passed to Numa Pompilius, a peaceful king who introduced religious practices, the 12-month calendar, and the role of high priests. After him came a series of kings, each more ambitious than the last. One of them, Tarquin the Proud, murdered his predecessor and ruled with an iron fist. But it was his son's violent act against a noblewoman that sparked outrage. The people had had enough. They overthrew Tarquin, abolished the monarchy, and declared Rome a republic. But don't let the word republic fool you. Power didn't belong to the people. It belonged to the patricians, the elite families who ruled the Senate. The commoners, or plebeians, had no real voice. Over time, the plebeians fought for rights. They staged walkouts, demanded reforms, and eventually won some concessions, written laws, elected tribunes, and limited influence over legislation. Still, the Republic remained a playground for the wealthy. Meanwhile, Rome was always at war. It conquered city after city across the Italian peninsula, then looked outward, defeating Carthage in the brutal Punic Wars, seizing North Africa, Spain, and the Greek world. Soldiers fought endless campaigns, but they weren't just pawns. Thanks to Gaius Marius, soldiers were now paid and promised land and retirement. This made them loyal, not to Rome, but to their generals. And when generals have private armies, ambition becomes deadly. Sulla, once an ally of Marius, turned on him and marched his army straight into Rome, breaking every law and unleashing civil war. He emerged victorious and ruled as dictator, setting the dangerous precedent that if you had enough legions, you could rule Rome. That precedent would echo into the rise of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was brilliant, ruthless, and beloved by the army. After conquering Gaul and claiming legendary victories, he returned to Rome. But he didn't come alone. He brought his legions and crossed the Rubicon, a direct act of war. His rival, Pompey the Great, fled to Egypt, only to be murdered by young pharaoh Ptolemy III. Caesar wasn't pleased. He sided with Cleopatra, Ptolemy's sister, and became entangled in a powerful love affair. Back in Rome, Caesar offered clemency to his enemies, which only made him more powerful. The Senate grew anxious. They named him dictator for 10 years, and then dictator for life. That final move sealed his fate. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Caesar was stabbed 23 times by over 40 senators, including his once trusted friend, Brutus. They believed they were saving the Republic. Instead, they triggered its death spiral. Civil war erupted again. This time, it was Caesar's heir, Octavian, against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. In the end, Octavian stood alone. Antony and Cleopatra were dead by their own hands, and Egypt fell under Roman control. Octavian became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. But he was clever. He didn't wear a crown or call himself king. Instead, he called it a restoration of the Republic. In truth, he controlled everything. His reign brought peace, prosperity, and stability. Roads connected the empire. A postal system linked cities. A permanent military was formed. The city of Rome was transformed with grand buildings, aqueducts, and monuments. But even in this golden age, the Senate was just a puppet show. When Augustus died, his stepson Tiberius took over. Intelligent but cold, he eventually withdrew from public life and left power in the hands of his Praetorian Guard commander, Sejanus. Sejanus became a puppet master, executing rivals and perhaps plotting to seize power. When his plan was uncovered, he was executed, but the damage was done. Tiberius became paranoid, executing anyone he suspected of betrayal. Then came Caligula. At first, the young emperor was loved. He threw lavish games and cut taxes, but soon he spiraled. He declared himself a living god, forced senators to worship him, and had incestuous relationships with his sisters. His cruelty and madness pushed the Praetorian Guard too far. They assassinated him and chose his uncle, Claudius, a man previously mocked for his disabilities, as emperor. Surprisingly, Claudius proved capable. He expanded Rome into Britain, improved infrastructure, and ruled with unexpected wisdom. But his death in 54 AD, possibly at the hands of his wife Agrippina, cleared the way for her son, Nero. Nero's rule is infamous. When the Great Fire of Rome broke out in 64 AD, rumors claimed he watched it burn while playing music. He blamed the Christians and launched one of the earliest persecutions. He killed his own mother, executed rivals, and plunged the empire into debt with excessive spending. Eventually, the Senate declared him an enemy of the state. Alone and abandoned, Nero took his own life, ending the Julio-Claudian dynasty. What followed was a year of chaos, 4 emperors in rapid succession. The last one standing was Vespasian, a general who restored order and began construction of the Colosseum, funded by plunder from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. His sons, Titus and Domitian, ruled in turn. Titus was beloved, but died young. Domitian ruled with paranoia and cruelty, until he too was assassinated. Then came a brief golden age, 5 good emperors who brought stability, expansion, and innovation. Trajan expanded Rome to its greatest territorial extent. Hadrian built walls to secure its borders. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, wrote meditations during war. But his son, Commodus, broke the cycle. He believed he was Hercules reincarnated, fought in the Colosseum as a gladiator, and nearly ruined the empire. His own inner circle had him strangled. His death opened the door to a century of crisis. From 235 to 284 AD, Rome saw 29 emperors. Most were killed in battle or assassinated. The empire fractured under external attacks and internal betrayal. Then came Diocletian, a former soldier who tried to fix the mess by dividing the empire into east and west, with 4 rulers in a tetrarchy. He also declared himself the earthly embodiment of Jupiter and launched brutal persecutions of Christians. But instead of destroying Christianity, he only made it stronger. When he retired, more chaos followed. Then came Constantine. After claiming to see a vision of Christ before battle, he legalized Christianity and defeated his rival Licinius to reunite the empire. He banned gladiator games and crucifixions and established a new capital in the east, Constantinople. Rome was no longer the center of the empire. In 476 AD, after centuries of internal decay, invasions, and economic collapse, the Western Roman Empire finally fell. The eastern half, now the Byzantine Empire, would continue for nearly 1,000 more years until its fall in 1453. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it didn't fall in one either. It was built on ambition and blood, and destroyed by the same. The Republic died long before the empire fell. And in the end, it wasn't just barbarians at the gates that brought Rome down. It was Rome itself. Maybe that's the real lesson. Even the greatest empires can't outrun their own shadow.